Hello, my name is John Nagoski, and I'm from Wisconsin in the USA. I would like to introduce you to my channel, English Reading with Questions and Answers. Chapter 3, Pittsburgh and Work. The great question now was, what could be found for me to do? I had just completed my 13th year, and I fairly panted to get to work, that I might help the family to a start in the new land. The prospect of want had become to me a frightful nightmare. My thoughts at this period centered in the determination that we should make and save enough of money to produce $300 a year, $25 monthly, which I figured was the sum required to keep us without being dependent upon others. Every necessary thing was very cheap in those days. The brother of my Uncle Hogan would often ask what my parents meant to do with me, and one day there occurred the most tragic of all scenes I have ever witnessed. Never can I forget it. He said, with the kindest intentions in the world, to my mother, that I was a likely boy and apt to learn, and he believed that if a basket were fitted out for me with knickknacks to sell, I could peddle them around the wharves and make quite a considerable sum. I never knew what an enraged woman meant till then. My mother was sitting sewing at the moment, but she sprang to her feet with outstretched hands and shook them in his face. "What, my son a peddler, and go among rough men upon the wharves? I would rather throw him into the Allegheny River. Leave me," she cried, pointing to the door, and Mr. Hogan went. She stood a tragic queen. The next moment she had broken down, but only for a few moments did tears fall and sobs come. Then she took her two boys in her arms and told us not to mind her foolishness. There were many things in the world for us to do, and we could be useful men, honored and respected, if we always did what was right. My father found it necessary to give up handloom weaving and to enter the cotton factory of Mr. Blackstock, an old Scotsman in Allegheny City, where we lived. In this factory, he also obtained for me a position as bobbin boy, and my first work was done there at $1.20 per week. It was a hard life. In the winter, Father and I had to rise and breakfast in the darkness, reach the factory before it was daylight, and with a short interval for lunch, work till after dark. The hours hung heavily upon me, and in the work itself I took no pleasure. But the cloud had a silver lining, as it gave me the feeling that I was doing something for my world, our family. I have made millions since, but none of those millions gave me such happiness as my first week's earnings. I was now a helper of the family, a breadwinner, and no longer a total charge upon my parents. Soon after this, Mr. John Hay, a fellow Scotch manufacturer of bobbins in Allegheny City, needed a boy, and asked whether I would not go into his service. I went and received $2 per week, but at first the work was even more irksome than the factory. I had to run a small steam engine and to fire the boiler in the cellar of the bobbin factory. It was too much for me. I found myself night after night sitting up in bed trying the steam gauges, fearing at one time that the steam was too low and that the workers above would complain that they had not power enough, and at another time that the steam was too high and that the boiler might burst. But all this it was a matter of honor to conceal from my parents. They had their own troubles and bore them. I must play the man and bear mine. My hopes were high, and it looked every day for some change to take place. What it was to be I knew not, but that it would come I felt certain if I kept on. Besides, at this date I was not beyond asking myself what Wallace would have done and what a Scotsman ought to do. Of one thing I was sure, he ought never to give up. One day the chance came. Mr. Hay had to make out some bills. He had no clerk, and was himself a poor pensman. He asked me what kind of hand I could write, and gave me some writing to do. The result pleased him, and he found it convenient thereafter to let me make out his bills. I was also good at figures, and he soon found it to be to his interest. Besides, dear old man, I believe he was moved by good feeling towards the white-haired boy, for he had a kind heart and was Scotch, and wished to relieve me from the engine to put me at other things. One evening, early in 1850, when I returned home from work, I was told that Mr. David Brooks, manager of the telegraph office, had asked my Uncle Hogan if he knew where a good boy could be found to act as messenger. My uncle mentioned my name and said he would see whether I would take the position. I remember so well the family council that was held. Of course, I was wild with delight. Mother favored, but father was disposed to deny my wish. It would prove too much for me, he said. I was too young and too small. Late at night, I might be required to run out into the country with a telegram, and there would be dangers to encounter. Upon the whole, my father said it was best that I should remain where I was. He subsequently withdrew his objection, so far as to give me leave to try, and I believe he went to Mr. Hay and consulted with him. Mr. Hay thought it would be for my advantage, and although, as he said, it would be an inconvenience to him, still he advised that I should try, and if I failed, he was kind enough to say that my old place would be open for me. This being decided, I was asked to go over the river to Pittsburgh and call on Mr. Brooks. My father wished to go with me, and it was settled that he should accompany me as far as the telegraph office, on the corner of 4th and Wood Streets. It was a bright, sunshiny morning, and this augured well. Father and I walked over from Allegheny to Pittsburgh, a distance of nearly 2 miles from our house. Arrived at the door, I asked Father to wait outside. I insisted upon going alone upstairs to the second or operating floor to see the great man and learn my fate. I was dressed in my one white linen shirt, which was usually kept sacred for the Sabbath day, my blue roundabout, and my whole Sunday suit. The interview was successful. He asked me how soon I could come, and I said that I could stay now if wanted. And looking back over the circumstance, I think that answer might well be pondered by young men. It is a great mistake not to seize the opportunity. The position was offered to me. Having got myself in, I proposed to stay there if I could. Mr. Brooks very kindly called the other boy, for it was an additional messenger that was wanted, and asked him to show me about, and let me go with him and learn the business. I soon found opportunity to run down to the corner of the street and tell my father that it was all right, and to go home and tell Mother that I had got the situation. And that is how, in 1850, I got my first real start in life. From the dark cellar running a steam engine at $2 a week, begrimed with coal dirt, without a trace of the elevating influences of life, I was lifted into paradise, yes, heaven, as it seemed to me, with newspapers, pens, pencils, and sunshine about me. There was scarcely a minute in which I could not learn something or find out how much there was to learn and how little I knew. I felt that my foot was upon the ladder and that I was bound to climb. I had only one fear, and that was that I could not learn quickly enough. The addresses of the various business houses to which messages had to be delivered. I therefore began to note the signs of these houses up one side of the street and down the other. At night I exercised my memory by naming in succession the various firms. Before long I could shut my eyes and, beginning at the foot at a business street, call off the names of the firms in proper order along one side to the top of the street, then crossing on the other side, go down in regular order to the foot again. The next step was to know the men themselves, for it gave a messenger a great advantage, and often saved a long journey if he knew members or employees of firms. He might meet one of these going direct to his office. It was reckoned a great triumph among the boys to deliver a message upon the street. The Pittsburgh of 1850 was very different from what it has since become. It had not yet recovered from the great fire which destroyed the entire business portion of the city on April 10, 1845. The houses were mainly of wood, a few only were of brick, and not one was fireproof. The entire population in and around Pittsburgh was not over 40,000. The business portion of the city did not extend as far as Fifth Avenue, which was then a very quiet street, remarkable only for having the theater upon it. Federal Street, Allegheny, consisted of straggling business houses with great open spaces between them, and I remember skating upon ponds in the very heart of the present Fifth Ward. My position as messenger boy soon made me acquainted with the few leading men of the city. The bar of Pittsburgh was distinguished. Judge Wilkins was at its head, and he and Judge McCandless, Judge McClure, Charles Shaler, and his partner Edmund M. Stanton, afterwards the great War Secretary, Lincoln's right-hand man, were all well known to me. My life as a telegraph messenger was in every respect a happy one, and it was while in this position that I laid the foundation of my closest friendships. The senior messenger boy being promoted, a new boy was needed, and he came in the person of David McCargo, afterwards the well-known superintendent of the Allegheny Valley Railway. He was made my companion, and we had to deliver all the messages from the Eastern line, while two other boys delivered the messages from the West. The Eastern and Western telegraph companies were then separate, although occupying the same building. Davy and I became firm friends at once. A short time after Davy's appointment, a third boy was required, and this time I was asked if I could find a suitable one. This I had no difficulty in doing in my chum, Robert Pitcairn, later on my successor as superintendent and general agent at Pittsburgh of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Robert, like myself, was not only Scotch, but Scotch-born, so that Davy, Bob, and Andy became the three Scotch boys who delivered all the messages of the Eastern Telegraph line in Pittsburgh for the then magnificent salary of $2.50 per week. It was the duty of the boys to sweep the office each morning, and this we did in turn, so it will be seen that we all began at the bottom. A messenger boy in those days had many pleasures. There were wholesale fruit stores, where a pocketful of apples was sometimes to be had for the prompt delivery of a message. Bakers and confectioners' shops, where sweet cakes were sometimes given to him. He met with very kind men, to whom he looked up with respect. They spoke a pleasant word and complimented him on his promptness, perhaps asked him to deliver a message on the way back to the office. One great excitement of this life was the extra charge of 10 cents, which we were permitted to collect for messages delivered beyond a certain limit. These dime messages, as might be expected, were anxiously watched, and quarrels arose among us as to the right of delivery. This was the only cause of serious trouble among us. By way of settlement, I proposed that we should pool these messages and divide the cash equally at the end of each week. I was appointed treasurer. Peace and good humor reigned ever afterwards. It was my first essay in financial organization.